Good afternoon and welcome to another OSR Tabletop live stream with DM Bloodworth. I am Richard DM Bloodworth, and this is a continuation of a live stream I did 2 days ago that unfortunately got interrupted by some events. I'm on vacation. I'm here in the Bahamas, and my wife and daughters returned earlier than I was expecting, and that's because the beaches got closed because a shark washed up on shore. So they had to close the beach there, and they all returned earlier. Today we're kind of reined in. There was a huge storm that came in through today, so instead of going to the beach, my wife and daughters are going out shopping, and here I am doing the next part of that live stream. So that live stream was a response to, and hello OGGM, how's it going? And so that live stream was a response to Condor DM and um, a dispute that we had. So basically, he had put out a video, and I'm going to recap it because I really covered the aspect of that in the first video. He had kind of made like a blanket statement that he has encountered players who just avoid traps, and they avoid combat by just choosing not to enter dungeons where they might encounter these things. And so I had questioned what I questioned what the term avoid, like what did he mean by avoid? Because there are game mechanics that are both written in the books or that you kind of develop as you gain experience as a dungeon master, to make it where it's not necessarily avoidance, it's actually more a case of either disarming or circumventing or coming up with some other means of getting beyond the trap, or getting around having to engage in the combat that the players might not be very much in favor of doing. So, and I started laying that out, and I was talking about traps to begin with, and I'm going to continue to expand on that first, and then I will move on to overall combat and such. So, and hello, Mirador. How's it going? Good to see you. Mirador is one of my players in my Advanced Dungeons and Dragons First Edition campaign, and soon to be my Castles and Crusades campaign. He plays a cleric and at times also a an illusionist thief as well. So, but without further ado, let's get right into this. So, I had already laid out the process in which a player character, most likely a thief, is going to first have to declare that he or she is searching for traps, then make a successful roll to find a trap, then to make a successful roll to disarm the trap or otherwise possibly trigger the trap that where no one is harmed by it and such. And then as long as they're successful along the way with those several different rolls, then they have circumvented the trap. And that's kind of where I left that off. And that's why I kind of said it's really not avoiding the trap. You're actually proactively, you are role playing, number one, because you're declaring what your character is actually doing. You have to declare that your character is actively searching for traps in that particular case. Now, I know in other game systems, because I'm talking old school here, so there isn't that automatic perception check that everyone just does as soon as they walk into a particular area or a room or a hallway or whatnot. Um, they have to actively say what their characters are doing. So that's the first element, and that other than the actively stating uh, that they're searching for traps, that's not in the rule books. That's just something that you kind of develop the sense of doing when you're learning how to become a dungeon master, or you're learning how to play the game, because that's really, role playing is a responsibility of both the players and the dungeon master to encourage it, and the players to actively do it. So, so that's one way that you can encourage your players to not look to just avoid um, conflict or avoid traps or whatnot, but to actually engage with them and let them get that sense of, now this, we've successfully defeated this trap. We've successfully, circumvented it or disarmed it or rendered it not a risk to them any longer. And I personally would award them experience points for having done so. Treated it almost as if they defeated a monster. You can assign the trap itself a number of hit die, which might be the amount of complexity to the trap, and then award experience points, based on that. Say that the thing had, essentially 24 hit points, and then you apply, that with the base type of trap, and you might even create that on the side, your own chart of, these are the kinds of traps, from very, very simple to more complex, and these are the experience points values for them to have been defeated. Um, that's the first way, and that is not written in the rule books. So that only comes with experience. The other thing that comes with experience is, and this is important for, the placement of monsters in a particular dungeon. And when you look at a an official module, sometimes those old school official modules, they did not have much of a sense of having an ecology that makes sense, right? So the dungeon ecology, the B2, the Keep on the Borderlands, the Caves of Chaos is a good example of this, where it's really a fun adventure to run. It's a lot of fun. I bring every group of any of my D&D, games, campaigns through the Caves of Chaos, because it's almost like a rite of passage, let's say. But the idea that those very different creatures are all living within the same complex doesn't make very much sense. And from what I understand, it's altered when it's I believe it's called Return to the Caves of Chaos, which might have been either a second or even a third edition return to that particular module, and it corrects that concept of it, changes the story around a little bit for it. When you're talking about traps, you should keep the same thing in mind. The trap isn't going to be something that the inhabitants of that dungeon or that lair don't have a workaround for. It doesn't make sense. It would essentially be cutting them off from, being able to access that area as well. Hey, thanks anyway, Mirador. This will go up live, or recorded, I should say, a little bit later on anyway. So, I will see you when I certainly get back from vacation, and looking forward to our Tuesday night game regardless of which one it's actually going to be. But thanks for popping in. So, getting back when you're placing traps into a dungeon, especially one that you've created yourself, um, you want it to make sense. You want that detect trap, not necessarily let them see the trap in its entirety, like the exact type of trap it is and such, but they might actually see, let's say it's a pit trap, right? A pit trap is not going to run from wall to wall and then the full length, along the floor line. There will typically be a ledge along the sides that and it might only be on one side. That's possible, but it's not going to run the full width of the hallway and then the full length of the trap itself without there being some kind of a mechanism to either lock it in place so that it does not, the inhabitants of the dungeon have to switch it off, then they can walk past, and then they can switch it back on again on the other side. So when the party members do a detect trap, they may not actually detect the trap itself. They might actually detect the mechanism that is going to control the trap, and either lock it down or potentially reset the trap. And that's another thing that you have to remember, that there has to be some means of resetting traps. Otherwise, the traps don't make sense. Once they're triggered, you can't just have an open pit trap there. The inhabitants are going to want to reset that trap for the next group that falls into play. You could have, as an encouragement for the player characters, and the players to engage in this kind of a thing. You can have the previous victims of the trap down at the bottom of the trap, and I will often put, some minor treasure at the bottom of these things, if it's a pit trap, or if it's some other kind of trap that encases people in, let's say it's a magical web trap and everything. You might find people that are, webbed up, and you could rescue them, and that could open up the doors for more, for more adventures and such. I know that's something that's in Skyrim, where a person is encased in webbing, captured by a spider, and the spider is in an ambush kind of situation, and so that becomes a trap too. Traps can be living things, and and create an ambush. So there's no rule written in the rule book that limits your imagination on the nature of traps that you're using. And so again, that comes with experience. You don't want your players to be in the position of just trying to avoid doing anything because it's been boring for them. All right. That should be a good indicator for you that you need to change things up. And you need to encourage them to engage in those things. And none of that is written in the Dungeon Master's Guide or the Player's Handbook or any other supplement or anything like that. That just all comes from you growing as a game master and picking up these little tricks, in order to encourage the players to engage in engage in the game that you are running, and ultimately that's the point, of gaming, in particular, is like you want your players to engage in the content that you are presenting them with. Now, I'm going to move on to talking about adventuring itself and dungeons, let's say. Um, Old school, I mean, obviously, old school, it's called Dungeons and Dragons for a reason, right? And many of us, when we first started playing, it was dungeon crawls, It might have been wilderness hex crawls as well, where they're engaging in different encounters that they're coming across in various hexes. But in most of those cases, I think a greater majority of dungeon masters were going to drop in some ruin that the players are then going to choose to delve into, and there they discover this dungeon or this cavernous um, complex that they're going to go into. It might be a lair of some kind of minor creatures, whether it be kobolds or a goblin warren or an orc lair. And the orcs might have taken over a previous dwarven lair or something along those lines, and so you're going to end up going into this place. Now, how do you encourage your players to engage with this? Is that again, you reward them with the experience for having done these things, right? So you can award them the experience. Let's say the entrance of this has long been lost. It's a place of legend, and so they happen upon it. And again, they say that they're actively searching for, you know, things that kind of stand out to them, and they make the essential roll. They find it, and now you can reward them with experience for making that discovery, especially if they relay it to others and take credit for having made that discovery. Now they're going into the dungeon, and you're going to reward them with experience points and possibly treasure for any combat that they have, and that's normal. That's a normal expectation that players should have coming into playing Dungeons and Dragons, or any of the various genres of tabletop role playing. Virtually all of them, especially old school, all of them have some kind of a combat component to them. All of them have some kind of a reward system based on a risk versus reward, and the rewards tended to be either currency, coins, or treasure, or whatnot. And in many cases, they actually grant experience points for treasure. AD&D First Edition is certainly dependent on that system, although you can alter that again. And I would recommend that possibly you do alter that by again creating systems where they can gain experience points from the alternatives. Um, the alternative to combat is parlaying your way through having that combat. It could be evasion, so, straight out. You have evaded the target, you're going to get a small portion of the experience for having evaded them and escaping. Um, you might have more circumvention, right? You find a different pathway that allows you to avoid them after you've spotted them in that area, and you've discovered a new way around. Maybe you have a druid that does transmute stone, and they're able to stone shape the way around that particular challenge, and you're going to reward them with experience points for all of that. Again, it's not avoiding the combat scenario. It's coming up with an alternative to it that the players have to create on their own. And they're basically going to say to the DM, this is what my character is doing, and the DM will then decide if they need to roll. what they kind of need to roll, what the challenge level of it is going to be, and then whether or not they're successful. Now, I've heard some people, and actually one of the response videos that Shoner was doing, um, that's the other YouTube connection to this whole thing. Um, Shoner had said that the game master describes can describe the victories, the successes, especially the critical successes, and because there's usually a decent consequence or an outcome for doing so, and players can describe their failures. So, if I'm picking a lock and I fail picking the lock, the GM can turn to me and say, describe that failure. And I say, well, I was, manipulating the lock, and one of my thieves tools, the pick of my thieves tool had snapped, and now the lock is jammed with that piece in there. And just explain this is how that failure worked out. Um, that is a way that you could still grant experience points for that, because in failure you can learn, from doing something, and from failing from it the attempt can still lead to some experience gained. And again, that's a way that you can reward the players for making these attempts. So they're not going to want to avoid all combat or avoid all potential for traps and everything by just simply saying, well, I'm not going to go into the dungeon. I'm just going to go to the town and have some drinks instead. All right. And you discourage that kind of activity in several ways. And I'm going to get into that right now. So, the first thing that you should be doing as a game master before you start your campaign is to sit down with your players, and this could be in person or it can be online even. And let's say that you've brought together 5 players, and you're going to say to the 5 players, "This is the game system that I'm looking to run." Now, you might have advertised this game and everything, so they already saw what game you're running, and that's what brought them to the table. So I would come out and I would say, here I am. I'm running Castles and Crusades. All right, and the players that have arrived to sit at the table, they're already aware of that, and so their expectation should be that we will be playing Castles and Crusades. Then I describe to them the kind of the theme and the tone, and what their expectations can be, or should be, based on that theme and tone, and what I'm looking to do as a game master. At that point, they can decide, oh, this is not what I'm looking for, and walk away. If they have decided that they're going to remain and they're going to play in this campaign, that's what's called a social contract. So it is now understood that they have bought into the concept of the campaign. Um, they like the game system, they like or they want to learn the game system. They like the world setting, or they want to learn more about the world setting, and they're good with the tone and some of the major features and such of what the campaign is intended to be. Now, I would also tell them that there are certain aspects of it that are going to be fully within their control, and we're kind of going to let their actions kind of guide where this thing goes forward. But there are some other things that are going to be the set in stones, right? And so that's when you, as a game master, set in stone the certain things that are not going to be altered by player requests or demands, or anything along those lines. So if a player is coming to the table and initially saying, well, I don't want to have any combat, that's when you tell them, well, there is going to be some combat in this, and there won't be, very many ways in every case to avoid it. That's just the nature of this game. And if you're not willing to accept that, this may not be the game for you then. And, I encourage you to try it. You may like it. I do give awards um, for taking part and doing the best that you can. And sometimes, even in failure, you might still gain some experience points for having done so, at least in the attempt. And you're going to see that the balance of risk versus reward is going to is really going to enhance your experience. You're going to, hopefully enjoy what we collectively, as a table group are going to produce. I have not encountered anyone who, in 40 years of playing role playing games in general, tabletop primarily, um, but multiplayer role playing games on computers kind of function the same way, right? In some circumstances, you'll have group adventures that are required to have a group just to enter the dungeon. And if you have a player who refuses to go into that dungeon, you're going to find another player that will join it. And that player will be left behind. They gain nothing for doing it. Plus, they're going to create a reputation that, they tend not to play that style of gaming, and they'll get left out, and they'll get left out from, player-run guilds and such like that. They will create a reputation for themselves that they're not really there to do this group content that exists. And the same thing applies to tabletop role-playing games. So they're not that much different. If you have a player sitting at your table who just constantly says, um, I'm petrified of traps. I don't want to ever encounter traps. And so, since traps are often in dungeons, I'm not walking into dungeons. That's not something um, that you can ultimately fix as a game master, other than just seeing the person off. With best wishes, I hope you find the game that you're looking for. Um, but you also need to make sure that you're making every effort to make the content that you are going to expose the players to make that content interesting, to make several possibilities of circumventing it without accepting a flat out refusal to engage. And that, I think, is the biggest thing here, is the to simply accept, well, I refuse to do this, is to really limit what can potentially be done at your table as a whole, because it's not just going to affect the one player. That is going to affect you as the game master, plus everybody else sitting at the table. So you really can't sit there and accept that as an answer, from a player, that I just refuse to engage. So that is another element that I didn't get into so much in the first video. Like I said, it got interrupted. It was the reason why I brought up my comment in Shoner's video, where he was breaking down Condor DM's video. And I just wanted clarification on what he meant by avoidance. And he took it, to mean something else. He took it as an attack. It wasn't an attack. And it would also was not an expression or demonstration of my lack of experience. He just didn't understand um, my motive for questioning. Um, he had you know, presupposed my motive for asking that question as being something negative, as an attack. Um, whereas I was really just, trying to figure out, like, I've never seen this. Now, again, and I've said this in a written text comment as well on that same Shoner video. I can't link the videos and everything here um, in the actual drop down and description of the video, because I'm not home on the computer. I'm kind of remote and just doing live streams, so I don't have any of that capability to do that, which I normally would. But I do want to um, reiterate that that was my intention. And the fact that he took it as an attack and then attacked back, it's not, I had never said, well, if it's not in the book, you don't do it, because that's just not the way that old school worked either. um that might be a more modern rules lawyer kind of thing, like, oh, you can't do that because it's not written in the book. I don't know any DM that's an old school DM that functions that way. That if it's not in the book, you don't do it. I mean, Rule Zero is a thing, and having rulings over rules is a thing from old school D&D. It's something that has always been in place, and not everything is detailed in old school D&D as it might be in 5e, which I have very limited experience with 5e. So I can't tell you how much, I also have limited experience or even less experience with 4e. Own it, never read it, just had it as a completionist kind of thing, having every edition of D&D on my shelf. And I have since gotten rid of 5e. I would move the 4e as well if I could, get a uh, decent value, selling price for it. And I probably would do the same thing for 3e. 3.5 I'm going to keep because I know a lot of comparisons are made between 3.5 and old school, or a lot of OSR games as well. So I'm going to hold on to my 3.5, and I will take a look at the 3.5 and see if, particularly the Dungeon Master's Guide, if it does cover some of these other scenarios. But in the old school, um, they leave that up for the Dungeon Master to figure out for themselves, and to create that nuance for themselves, and create that interesting scenario that kind of breaks from the commonplace. It breaks from the norm. Um, Not all. I was thinking about this whole thing, and thinking about how do you make traps more unique for players, or even if you have experienced players. I have very, very experienced players, and so when I'm just going to put up this banner here. So when I was thinking about this portion of the video, and describing, I was like, you know, I would put a pit trap in, and have the pit trap be maybe 6 inches deep, and maybe a small film of something at the very bottom of it. It could be a mold trap, right? And so they'll see a 6-inch trap and they'll be like, oh, this is no big deal. And then they step on, they step into it, or they'll investigate it even more so because it would be such a curiosity for them to see, why would anybody develop a pit trap? It's only 6 inches deep. And then there, boom, they get hit with the mold, or they get, you know, just change it up a little bit so that it becomes something that is interesting for them. And now they can record, hey, this is a new kind of trap that we discovered. And maybe that kind of trap is something that's very unique to the group of creatures that they're encountering. That's another thing. I mean, changing it up where, the player characters will start to develop a catalog of new types of traps that they've encountered, and maybe some of them are cultural, that they've encountered, where there's a difference between goblin pit traps and kobold pit traps, and now they can start to determine that it's like, hey, you know what, we know that we've seen these kobold pit traps before, and now we can kind of anticipate that we are going to face kobolds at some point in this dungeon, before they had that first combat encounter. And so they would prepare for that kind of a thing. There's so many opportunities not written in the books, that you're going to develop. You're going to develop um, a repertoire of different tactics that you're going to have your NPCs and your monsters utilizing to help. The primary purpose is not just to create a challenge. The primary purpose is for it to create the interest level and player engagement in what they're doing now. So, don't just keep on hitting them with these mundane, 10 foot, a 10 foot by 10 foot square, 10 foot deep pit trap, and they fall in, they take d6 damage, they crawl themselves back out of it again. There was no way to prevent falling in this trap. There was no way. There's no lever or kind of a switch that can be hit in order to disable the trap. And if they didn't detect it, they fell into it automatically. That is the kind of lazy dungeon design. I think that you're much better off as a game master to make the encounters, including pit traps, make those encounters interesting, make them different than the last time the players had encountered it, or make it a cultural difference, depending on what kind of a lair they're in, so that can even help them identify what type of a lair they're in, because they may not know initially, especially if it's part of like a hex crawl, wilderness hex crawl, and they come across this unmarked ruin with an access to deeper into it, into the basement levels, and then there follow the dungeon levels and such. And so it might be something that part of the exploration pillar of role playing will be something that you can reward them with experience for having done so. So that is pretty much my take on all of it, on the avoidance issue. I don't like the term avoid because it doesn't allow for true player engagement, and what the dungeon master has spent time actually prepping for. And that's a big debate a lot of times, because when a dungeon master preps for their next session. It should never be so detailed that it becomes railroady. That's without a doubt. Um, Players always have a way of finding a different route to go. And so they will take the story in a new direction that you might not have planned on, or you probably haven't planned on. That doesn't mean that everything that you've prepped for that session is just thrown away. You can take those ideas and move them to a new location, tweak them to match that new location depending on where the players are going to, and and that way it will help you not feel like you're just spinning your wheels, creating a whole bunch of stuff, and then the players just keep on avoiding it. So I wouldn't accept the term avoidance, or to avoid something, or to just refuse to engage. Um, I mean, ultimately, if you have a player or two that is consistently doing that, yet the rest of the table are having you know, uh, a fun time, uh, and they're role playing and they're exploring and they're engaging in everything, then it might come to the point where you're going to turn to those one or two players and say, "Listen, this is what we're going to continue doing. And if that's not right for you, that's fine. I wish you luck. Go elsewhere. I hope you find the game that you're looking for." And that's the kind of thing that you're going to find, as part of a vetting process. Now, vetting, I know some people will say, well, you need to vet your players before they even sit down, and that's not a realistic thing to do. Um, you don't, as somebody who has done some 20 virtual conventions, or a mix now of in-person and virtual conventions, um, I never know who's coming to the table. And so that whole vetting idea is something that I'm going to assume the player has done because they've read the description of the game that I'm running and they've signed up for it. That's the vetting process. They've already shown an interest in the game system and the setting and the general description of what the adventure is going to be about. They've bought into it. And so that's vetting. Now, if you're going to invite people into your home, um, then that's a different level of vetting. And that's something that I could spend a whole new video on, and maybe I will, because even though I haven't done that in decades, it was my friends, my elementary school, and then middle school, and then high school friends who were either coming into my house or I was going into theirs, or we're all meeting up at the public library. If none of our parents wanted us around for 4 hours on that particular day, we we would go to the public library, and sometimes if only one or two of us would go there, there were usually another two, three tables running something, and we would join them, or they would join us and fill in our ranks and such. So you never quite know who is going to come to the table, and so it makes that kind of vetting a little bit more after the fact. Now, if you've run two or three sessions and one player just doesn't seem to be fitting in, then I pull that player aside and say, "Listen, again, reiterate, this is what we're looking to do here. Um, you can see that most of the party is engaged, and we're going to go forward with that. Um, I hope that you stay, and just don't be afraid to actually engage in what's going on. But if it's just not your cup of tea, you're welcome to leave, and I wish you luck. Bringing somebody into your home is a totally different thing. Um, Meeting somebody at a game store is different again than doing something that's online as well. So yeah, so depending on where you're running your game, that is going to have a number of differences as to how you're going to vet your players. But vetting is important. But I think a lot of the vetting is actually done by the player themselves. When they see that game advertised and they're showing up to the table, you already know that you have somebody who is engaged. So getting back to my argument with Condor DM, when he said, well, when I said I just don't see that avoidance as being a real issue. I've never encountered it before. Um, I said in a text, I was like, well, maybe I've been lucky. And in all of these decades of running uh, tabletop role playing games or participating in massively multiplayer RPGs and oftentimes running things there as well, um, I've not experienced players who just don't want to play the game, um, the game at hand. They just want to go to the tavern and play chit chat with the rest of the player characters. That's not something that in anything I have ever encountered, number one. Um, that doesn't make me inexperienced. I think that makes me actually fortunate that I've never had to deal with that. But I think that that's less an old school thing than it is a modern player thing. And of course, I'm not talking full blanket statement here. I think it's even a minority with modern gamers as well. But I think it's a much, much smaller minority in old school. Because in old school, I mean, we were very much at the basic level of of what tabletop role playing games were. They weren't very complex. They were very much combat oriented. They were very much dungeon crawl oriented. And so for a player to say, well, I'm just going to avoid, because I don't like traps, I'm going to avoid dungeons, and I don't like combat, so I'm going to avoid adventuring. And I'm just going to look to sit in the tavern and, listen to the bard singing and chit chatting with NPCs or whatever. Um, I it has to be such a small percentage, a minuscule percentage of players like that in the 70s, 80s, and potentially even in the 90s that, I don't think it's anything that you'd have to concern yourself with. And you certainly don't need the experience specifically to know how to deal with that. Um, you just need um, the experience to keep your players engaged. And so if you do that, and if your players keep on coming back to your table, I mean, that's the best indicator of you're doing what they're looking for you to do, is to come to they keep on coming back. And they don't just come back for one or two sessions. They've come back for 100 sessions. They've come back for 200 sessions. All right. Or you kind of know you're being successful uh, if you're a game master and you've been able to string along a number of different game systems for months on end, campaigns, followed by some that run several years or whatever. When you put out an advertisement for your upcoming game, and you get 12 people sign up for it, that's telling you that what you're presenting is something that players want to engage with. And I think that's the key here. I think the key is, to get back to the question of, um, you know, players avoiding traps, give them the incentive not to, encourage them not to. Players avoiding combat, give them all the reasons in the world to want to engage, give them all the reasons in the world to want to adventure, and you'll be successful. You'll have an easier time handling with the very rare player who just refuses to engage in anything that you have planned for your next game session. So I'm going to leave it there. Thanks for those that joined in. I know this was kind of impromptu, and it's in the middle of the day, like lunchtime for many people, and so this will get a lot more views after it's posted, um, for something that people can look at later on. And I will continue looking at the comments from the previous part one. This is the part two. We'll see if anything else needs to be addressed, but I will address any additional questions, including those from Condor DM, or any additional ideas or whatnot. And I will deal with those in the comments section. So as always, thanks for joining. Hope you like this this live stream. Unfortunately, like I said, I couldn't invite people in because I'm on an iPad, and it's just not quite sure if I can do more than just live stream on vacation in a different country. So it's not really sure how much capability I'll have for that. So anyway, have a great one. Take care. And I will see you on my regular schedule next week, starting I return the 29th, so probably starting the 30th, I will be getting ready to, jump right in and engage. All right, have a good one. Take care.